Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsey Boback. I've had the pleasure of mentoring Phoebe Holtz from ninth grader at Fieldston School this spring. Her project is focused in mycology, that is the study of mushrooms. She grew mushrooms at home in a home environment, aimed at illustrating the feasibility and simplicity of homegrown nutrition. She collected a ton of data, a ton of pictures, um, and she did some calculations on biological efficiency and just took photos of all the developmental stages of mushrooms in the hopes of trying to share that with you all today. Um, and on top of all that, she was able to attend a workshop for mushrooms, enhancing her practical knowledge. And then even a local urban farm facility that actually she'll tell you a little tidbit about. It's a little fun thing that I thought I'd ever share with you in a little bit. But she had a really cool experience with just a ton of learning about mushrooms. And I mean, mushrooms are just very important, I think, for the future of homegrown nutrition. So I'll let her tell you more about all of her research that she's done.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Phoebe, and I'm an eighth grader at Fieldston. Next slide, please. My mentor this season was Lindsey. She's on the core color team at PPG Paints. She went to Kent State University for astrophysics before she switched to geology, and she has 3 degrees. She has one in geoscience, one in geology, and one in chemistry. And now she designs base formulas for car paint and lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And for fun, she likes to cycle and garden. Next slide, please. For my project, I grew oyster mushrooms in 4 different substrates to see what would work best. And so I was really interested in fungi in particular because I've grown plants before, but never mushrooms. And I am also curious about how they could work with recycled materials and decomposers because that's relevant to the environment these days. Um, I learned how to pasteurize the growing mediums and colonize the substrates with the spawn, which you'll see a bit more on. I also learned how to set up the optimal growing conditions for my mushrooms in my home environment. Um, I learned how to measure, record, and display, and later analyze all my data. And then I also learned about urban farming communities, right, very close to where I go to school and live. And so how far I got, I completed the full growth cycle for 4 buckets of mushrooms. And then after that finished, I started a 5th one with my knowledge from the other 4. And in the future, I'd like to experiment with making things with the leftover mycelium. And I'd also like to learn how mushrooms can work as decomposers and help the environment more. Next slide, please. So this is what my buckets looked like when I first set them up. I use 4 substrates. So I have coffee grounds, wood chips, cardboard, and Timothy hay. And can you play the video, please? So this shows the top-down view on the buckets every day. The white stuff that you see spreading is the mycelium, and that's colonizing the substrate. And basically that starts to grow before the mushrooms fruit. So you can see here that the hay was the first to fruit, and you change the growing conditions for them. And in this video, we don't actually see the coffee fruiting. I made this video, and then I went away for 2 weeks on spring break, and I came back, and the coffee had grown several mushrooms, so that was kind of a fun little surprise. And then next slide, please. So I also looked at some more technical numbers. I started with looking at the pH of all the substrates, and all the substrates were actually in the ideal pH range for mushrooms. But I also looked at the carbon to nitrogen ratios of the substrates. And based off of this, I would have thought that coffee would do the best. It was closest to the ideal ratio of 27:1. But as you'll see later, the cardboard actually did surprisingly well. So this ended up not being a big player in determining whether the mushrooms would grow well or not, but it was something I looked into. So next slide, please. So after the mushrooms grew, I calculated the biological efficiency, which was the weight of the harvested mushrooms divided by the dry weight of the substrate times 100%. So you can see here that the cardboard did the best by far. They produced more mushrooms. We really did not do well at all based on this calculation because it's just so heavy. But the interesting thing with that is that coffee would normally be a waste product. I was using leftover coffee grounds. So it was kind of something to think about, that maybe it's okay that it's not quite as efficient if you're using something that would otherwise be thrown away. Okay, next slide, please. I also made some tables and graphs. So I kept track of how many mushrooms were growing in each bucket at each day. So that's shown in this table and in this graph. Over there on the bottom, it's compared to environmental factors of temperature and humidity. And then the bar graph up on the top shows the total weight of mushrooms produced by each substrate. So you can see that the cardboard did the best and the coffee followed up second. Next slide, please. So I also went to a couple mushroom community events. I went to a mushroom festival in Brooklyn. So I listened to a guy talk about kind of the role that mushrooms play in our environment. I saw some really cool mushrooms. And I also, that was the first time I learned about things made out of the leftover mycelium. So on the far right, there's a bookend that somebody grew the mycelium in a mold, demolded it, dried it out, and then had a 3D bookend, which was kind of cool to me. So next slide, please. I also went to an urban mushroom farm in the Bronx. They actually sell their mushrooms to Tobala on Riverdale Ave, if you know the restaurant. They grow their mushrooms in a humidity tent, so it's a little hard to see, but there's a bunch of bags here that each have the colonized substrate and will eventually grow mushrooms. And then they also grow microgreens in hydroponics, so in water, and they have a small outdoor farm. And they do community workshops and just kind of outreach to show people that you can grow things at home. So I thought that was neat. Next slide, please. So highlights, we're seeing the mushrooms grow from just being the spawn to the mycelium to seeing them fruit, and then harvesting them and getting to eat them was really fun. And also getting to have to learn about mushroom community. There's a lot of people out there who know a lot of cool things. That was really nice to see and learn about. Lessons learned. I learned how important it is to record and keep measurements every day. And then how to document things so it's nice. When you get to the end, you have lots of data to work with. And then challenges. It was a little tricky to set up the right growing environment. Like I said, I was growing these at home and they need a very humid environment. So at first I didn't have them under anything. I just had them sitting in my bathroom, and that was way too dry for them. They need about like 80 to 90% humidity. So eventually I had to put garbage bags over them, so that would keep in the humidity, but I cut holes in the bags to also allow for airflow. So that was a bit of a learning curve. And then also figuring out how to analyze my data at the end and just determine like which was best, because there are multiple ways to look at it. So next slide, please. So I made a whole video showing how, this is just talking about this spawn. I'm not sure if the sound's on. That is the mushroom spawn. So it's the ground that's been inoculated with the mycelium. That's what you mix with your substrate before you grow them. And then next slide, please. So then this is after I did my 4 buckets with the separate mixtures. I made the separate substrates. I made a bucket with a mix, and so that video showed the bucket at day 1, and then there's later at day 30. You can see it's much more white. Next slide, please. So there are pictures of the mushrooms when they were growing and after I harvested them. In the top right corner is kind of the first stage, and then the photo to the left of that is when it's starting to grow a bit further along, and then these two larger photos are like right before harvest, and the large photo in the bottom right corner is the final harvested mushrooms. So next slide, please.
Incredible job. All right, virtually, what questions do we have for Phoebe?
Hi, Phoebe. This is Seema.
Hi.
Any particular reason you chose the oyster mushrooms?
When I was researching different types of mushrooms, I learned that oyster mushrooms were very easy to grow at home and that they grew most prolifically likely. And since I had never done this before, I wanted something that would work and give me the best results. So that's why I chose oyster mushrooms.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey, I had a question as well. Nice. This was really fun. I was actually rooting for coffee to be the best substrate because I do have a lot of coffee grounds myself, but My question is actually asked about, did you taste your mushrooms? Did you find any discernible difference between, because of the carbon, what was
So I
it,
did
carbon
taste
nitrogen
them.
ratio?
I did taste them at the very end, and I did not tell any difference between the ones grown in different substrates, but it was still fun to eat them.
Cool.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That was fantastic. Great job, Phoebe.